and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov has flown to Washington to meet his counterpart Tillerson. Can they mend the Russia-U.S. ties as candidate Trump promised? And I sit down with an ICBC bank executive to discuss the ways and philosophy as well as visions of doing business across the Belt and Road countries. We begin today's show in Washington, D.C., where U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson will meet with Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov on Wednesday to discuss Ukraine, Syria, and bilateral issues. In April, Tillerson already met with Lavrov in Moscow, where they expressed conflicting views on Syria. So how will their discussion progress from that meeting? We will go to our panel to ask for their answers after this background story.
For the first time in years, Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov is coming to Washington, and he's meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. This is the highest-ranking Russian official that Mr. Trump will meet since taking office. On Wednesday, Mr. Lavrov meets Secretary of State Rex Tillerson in Washington, their second in-person meeting in little over 3 months since Secretary Tillerson has been in office.
I want to welcome Foreign Minister Lavrov to the State Department and express my appreciation for him making the trip to Washington so that we could continue our dialogue and our exchange of views that began in Moscow with the dialogue he hosted on a very broad range of topics. Thank you.
The agenda is said to include Syria and Ukraine. In particular, Tillerson and Lavrov are expected to discuss the de-escalation zones inside Syria that Russia, Iran, and Turkey agreed to create last week. 4 areas in the civil war-ravaged country are supposed to be under ceasefire starting this week. The U.S. has hesitantly endorsed the zones. Relations between the U.S. and Russia deteriorated after the U.S. missile strikes against a Syrian airfield in response to a chemical weapon attack that Washington blamed on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The closed-door meeting between the U.S. President and Russia's top diplomat comes a day after Mr. Trump fired FBI Chief James Comey, throwing allegations of Russian meddling in the U.S. elections back into the spotlight and adding uncertainties to bilateral ties.
And for more on Lavrov's U.S. visit, we have both in Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer, Russian defense analyst, and also Mark Sleboda, international relations and security analyst, originally from the United States, now based in Moscow. And in Boston, U.S., we are joined once again by Jim Walsh, senior research associate at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Yesterday, gentlemen, we were talking about the victory parade in Moscow. And today we are seeing another meeting between United States and Russia. Mr. Walsh, how much can we expect really from this round of meeting, as the last round was pretty much a disappointment?
Yeah, Tian, I think you're right to have referenced that earlier meeting in Moscow roughly a month ago, where Tillerson not only met with Lavrov, but spent 2 hours with Putin, and by all accounts it was sort of frosty. The good news was they came out of that meeting saying, we're going to have a working group, we're going to work on some of these issues. This is a follow-on to that. I think maybe things are a little less tense. The previous meeting was in the direct aftermath of the chemical weapons controversy. So things have calmed down a bit, but in the U.S., Russia continues to be a major political story. And I would say that the Trump administration's views on Syria have gone back and forth and are rather hard to pin down. So I would have modest expectations about this meeting, particularly as it relates to Ukraine. But I'm guessing that, you mentioned bilateral issues. Both countries have things to complain about. The U.S. may very well raise what it perceives as Russian violations of the INF Treaty, the nuclear treaty. And Russia will probably raise questions about expanding missile defenses, which it is unhappy with.
Modest, is that the key word, Mr. Sleboda, that you would like to use about the result?
Yeah, I think we should have realistic and limited expectations. First and foremost, the 2 primary issues of discussion, Syria and Ukraine, are ones where the Obama administration and the Putin administration had wildly divergent, I think you could say quite accurately, directly opposing sides. It is unclear how much that has shifted with the new Trump administration. The new Trump administration does not have all of its people online at the Russia desk, in the State Department, and elsewhere. I think they're a little behind the curve on this. It's not unusual. President Putin has previously remarked that President Obama took 8 months to fully get together his team to be able to seriously sit down with Russia on these complicated issues. But also as well, there seems to be a great deal of infighting in the Trump administration between Trump and Congress, these neo-McCarthyite witch hunts of a partisan flavor in the United States, that is seeking to draw Russia into their election fiasco. I think Trump and the U.S. deep state perhaps themselves have wildly diverging views on both the Syria and Ukraine crisis, where he, at least during his campaign and somewhat after, indicated he's in favor of détente and cooperation with Russia.
So, Mr. Felgenhauer, isn't that the best time for Russia to streamline its new strategy toward the United States, while Washington seems to have infights going on in an intense way?
Well, we rather already know what's going to be at this meeting. On Tuesday, there was a preliminary meeting, and after it, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov, who talked in New York to his counterpart in the State Department, told journalists that the meeting is going to be primarily about Syria. I don't think that Ukraine will be much there on the agenda at all. And on Syria, Russia has right now a very concrete thing it wants from the United States. Last week in Astana, there was a memorandum signed on the so-called de-escalation in Syria. And after that, Russia has tabled a resolution in the United Nations Security Council to get a UN mandate for that, backing up that memorandum. So right now, Moscow very much wants for the Trump administration not to oppose that, and maybe support, or at least not to oppose, for this mandate to go through. And I believe that's what really Russia wants, and that's what it wants right now, and this is very concrete.
Mr. Can Washington, at least even with the lack of personnel dealing with Russia, even with a lot of disagreements going on, be able to, at least from the Trump administration, support that?
Well, you know, it's interesting that one spot that is filled is the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Haley, and she has often staked out what might be called a more independent view on foreign policy, separate from what Secretary Tillerson has said. So I think that remains to be determined. She's tended to take a tougher line on Russia, a tougher line on Syria, a tougher line on other issues with other countries. So absent a meeting of the minds there, I would have to wait and see. I don't think she's going to be enthusiastic about it.
This is exactly the confusion, isn't it, gentlemen? I mean, at this point, I don't even know which quote I should use right now that would indicate certain directions from the United States about what to do with Russia, even though the other side it seems to be quite clear. So, Mr. Sloboda, which line of rhetorics should we read? Or actually, we should read all of them and try to figure out what is likely to be the strategy behind this, or lack of strategies behind this.
Yeah, I prefer not to view rhetoric and prefer to look at facts on the ground. I don't think we should take the pronouncements out of Nikki Haley seriously. She's an appointment with absolutely zero foreign policy education or experience. I don't really know why she's at the United Nations except to bolster her domestic political career. The Secretary of State has already tried once to put her in her place and remind her that anything she says should be constructed from from building blocks of policy built by the State Department. But I think there are some hopeful signs, despite the U.S.'s illegal unilateral attack on the Syrian government and a base where Russian military were stationed. Since then, we have seen U.S. military forces and Russian military forces, both in support of, respectively, Eastern and Western Kurdish forces, move to the Turkish border, seemingly in coordination, to limit any further Turkish regime invasion and incursions into Syria. And that seems to have some effect, and certainly the office of Erdogan, his ministers have been replying and actually making threats against U.S. soldiers that participated in this. That's some positive signs on the ground in Syria, and I think we shouldn't be too pessimistic moving forward.
Well, Mr. Felgenhauer, though, I would like to ask you two questions as a result of the answer from Mr. Sloboda. First of all, do you agree with him about the latest analysis of what's going on in Syria, Russia's role, and U.S. likely position? Secondly, of course, is about the fact that it seems the investigation against President Trump by certain teams are still going on, drip, drip, drip. The latest question is about why Flynn was only fired 18 days after the facts became clear. So I'm sure further things will come up as well. With all of these mixed, will Washington be able to approach Russia's position on Syria in a friendly way, at least by the Trump administration?
Well, the Trump administration seems to be, to a large extent, not very functional, to put it mildly. And the continuing Russian Trump connection investigations in Congress and by the American intelligence community and FBI are going to, of course, weigh heavily on any capability of the Trump administration to move into any kind of closer, more cooperative relationship with Russia in Syria or anywhere else in the world. There in Syria, right now, Russia and the United States are not really opposing each other at all, which is good. But on the other side of it, I don't see how they could really cooperate. Because not only because of the Russian investigation back in the United States, but also because the Russian military and the American military don't really want to become too intimate with each other, because that could disclose secrets on recon gathering that both sides would want to keep very, very secret. These are the crown jewels. So I don't think that both military are going to be very enthusiastic, even if they're asked by their political masters to cooperate. And that means, well, most likely we're going to be in the same kind of state, not opposing each other, at the same time not very cooperating with each other. I believe that's understood in Moscow. So right now we want only one thing from the Americans. Don't veto the resolution on the Astana Agreement.
Well, is it asking too much, Mr. Walsh?
Well, I agree that we're not going to see any real military cooperation, but I do think there could be political cooperation, whether it's this UN resolution, whether it's agreement about safe zones or other issues related to humanitarian aid and de-escalation.
That really means, Mr. Walsh, when you're saying that, that means already great progress, I have to say.
Well, if that happens, and I will disagree with my colleague about the effects of the investigation about Russia, and also the other colleague who said it was a witch hunt. That sounds like conspiracy theories to me. This is a bipartisan investigation. The heads of the intelligence community have repeatedly testified to the fact that there were issues here, and I think that'll go on. But I think actually the U.S. system has enough play here that it can treat that as one issue and not necessarily have that spill over into Russia policy. I do think that going forward, Trump's original inclination, it seemed to me, was to have a policy that was more in coordination with Russia, less focused on Assad, more focused on ISIS. And then it all got sort of derailed over the chemical weapons attack, which I believe the international community has concluded was carried out by Assad forces. But in any case, the question is, can they get back to where they were prior to that? I wouldn't rule that out. The problem here, Tian, and you referred to it already, is, you know, is the U.S. policy on Tuesday going to be the same as it is on Thursday? And there's just so much shifting here. It's hard to know whether it's by words or by action.
Well,
it's hard to know what the consistent policy will be.
You know, there's at least a Friday. Maybe some politics will come out on that. I don't know. So let's go to Mr. Sloboda. You seem to, first of all, disagree with some of the facts that stated by Mr. Walsh, and he also seems to disagree with the final conclusion as well. Mr. Sloboda.
Yeah, there seems to be a tendency of people out of the West, and being a U.S. military veteran myself, I think I can attest to this, people in the West, to speak of themselves in the West as the international community or as the world, when really they're only a very small part of it, if a rather loud and boisterous one. I think that's a little bit of solipsism here. Certainly, the consensus of the international
I'm referring to
community
Amnesty International,
on the chemical
UN
weapons,
Rights Watch
incident.
Okay. I see different opinions over there.
Yeah. Gongos funded and organized out of the West, yes.
Now,
we know
is that a conspiracy theory?
Al-Qaeda, Khan Shaykhun is an Al-Qaeda stronghold. I think anything, without any investigation on the ground, there really can't be any proof of what Al-Qaeda's narrative is out of Khan Shaykhun.
All right. Now, gentlemen, I want you to sit back a little bit. We earlier talked about very specific picture about this meeting, about these scenarios in Syria. Now we sit back. At the earlier stage of Trump administration, its campaign, it was talking about closer relationship with Russia because it seems candidate Trump wants to change the overall momentum about how U.S. foreign policy is doing. Now things getting really bogged down. Not to mention there are so many investigations and also infights at the Parliament, at the Congress rather. So how will this, what would this mean, Mr. Falkenhauer, for any possibility of a new direction of U.S. foreign policy? Is President Trump, as a result, going to once again become what the other presidents were like toward Russia?
Russia's what Russia wants from the United States, Trump or no Trump, is a recognition that Russian increased and increasing influence in a post-Soviet space is a good thing and should not be opposed or seen as a threat to the West. Can Trump produce that? That's very questionable. He said he wants the deal. But a deal would mean that Russia should surrender something, and there are things that Moscow is not ready to surrender at all. And that is primarily, of course, the post-Soviet space, and it's growing as it believes influence there. And of course, and also there are the American bases and forces in Europe that Russian military see as very threatening. The missile defense bases in Poland and Romania that Russia believes should be removed, and forces should be run back from the front line of NATO. So there's Russia has a very big list of what it would want to get, and it's not clear what it can give Trump in return for him to produce that to the American public that he made a good deal.
Okay. Very briefly from the other two guests, 30 seconds for each if I can. Has that quote-unquote window opportunity been missed already between Washington and Moscow now? Mr. Sloboda.
Yeah, I think that whatever Trump's initial inclinations were, that the U.S. deep state has used these witch hunts in attempt by the blob and the deep state to end that, and they have been fairly successful so far. Any attempt by Trump to improve relations will be greeted extremely hostilely by the press and by the deep state, the duopoly parties in Congress. But I think that he will attempt to make room to maneuver in that direction wherever and whenever he can.
All right. Midterm election already upcoming next year. This is big political cycle for United States. Mr. Walsh, how do you think that relationship is likely to be shaped by all of these things?
Well, if Mr. Trump's party suffers big losses at the midterms, it will weaken his already weak position and make it more difficult, but the presidents always have more leeway in foreign policy. So I think it's possible that there could be an improvement in the U.S.-Russian relationship despite Republican orthodoxy on it. I think it's possible. The deal here so far, and we don't have a lot of data, Mr. Trump does not look like a strategist. He seems like a guy who reacts to events, and events in the future are very hard to predict.
But Mr. Trump is also learning on the job, as well as we have witnessed. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I am also learning together with our audience, with your insights as well. Pavel Felgenhauer, Mark Sleboda, and Jim Walsh. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you so much. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. Still to come on our program. What is the wisdom behind China's business in Belt and Road countries? I caught up with ICBC Bank Executive for answers. The full interview right now.
For example.
The world is now at a critical juncture with tremendous challenges. A new idea, it was made known in the year 2013, has led to global brainstorm, and many expected to inspire and make changes happen. That is BRI, or Belt and Road Initiative, an idea about regional and global connectivity. The idea originated from China, a developing country, which of course jumps to the second largest economy in the world recently, and willing to contribute solutions to global challenges through cooperation for win-win. Take a look at this.
It's about creating the world's largest stage linking vibrant economies. Began in 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative is building up infrastructure and connectivity from Asia to Europe and Africa via a wide network of projects. Many Chinese companies are seizing this opportunity, making inroads on the Going Global strategy, an effort that has been the battle cry for decades. Chinese businesses invested more than $18 billion in establishing trade zones across 20 Belt and Road countries by the end of 2016. With a total output of $50 billion, the cooperative trade zones have so far created more than $1 billion in tax revenue and about 180,000 jobs for the host countries. The Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, or ICBC, the world's largest bank by assets, is one of the frontline investors. The bank is deeply involved in providing easy financing and smoothing over trade along the routes of the Belt and Road Initiative. But challenges and risks remain. Outward investment straddles a set of countries that have a diverse range of cultures, economies, and legal and political systems. And overinvestment could be another looming risk. Despite potential challenges, Chinese enterprises are drawn to seek new opportunities along the Belt and Road.
Some of the Chinese companies going global are now led by people who have profound knowledge and experience about both worlds, the developing countries and the developed economies. Zhang Hongli is one of them. He is now a Senior Executive Vice President of ICBC, the largest commercial bank in the world from China. Since leaving his previous jobs as an international investment banker, he has been leading ICBC on its going global work, establishing branches worldwide and supporting clients, particularly Chinese companies all over the world. Leading up to the BRI summit in Beijing, I visited him at the ICBC headquarters here in the city. He is straightforward in answering my questions. ICBC has been embracing the going global strategy for a long time. You personally have been working on those projects for years. And now with BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, certainly this is likely to be a new stage of that development.
You know, even though we have done so much for so many years, but our international business probably is only less than 10%.
Yeah.
So compared with many other international banks, This is very, very small.
Are you looking at some numbers?
Of course, we want to do 15-20% of our entire business in the next 5 years.
Think about BRI, mainly countries developing and emerging economies. So is that a very different stage of your going global strategy?
Well, we certainly learn a lot, and we have benefited a lot from many of the international investment into China. And now I think we are sharing what we learned and what we achieved in the past 30, 40 years and even 60 years to share that with the world. And I think China has come to the stage of development that we can do that. For us, I think the key word here is collaboration. We need to collaborate with our Chinese clients. Yeah. We need to collaborate with our local clients and with the local regulators and there are other accountant, lawyers, etc., helping us to evaluating these projects.
So how does that work? For example, you traveled to Africa recently, I understand that.
In the Mozambique project, we are working with quite a few different banks, international banks. We're also working with credit enhancing agencies, for example, COFAS, the French credit agency, the Italian one, the SOFET, and then there's some other international organizations that we're working with. The project in Jordan, we are working with EBRD, we are working with MIGA, the U.S. credit enhancing agency, we are working with IFC. So it's a different project. We have different, international, multinational, multilateral agencies that we're working with.
What have you learned through this process?
Each environment is different. Each project is different.
Angola, for example.
Well, in Angola, it's a big project. We call it CC Hydro project. It's a multi-billion-dollar project, and the operator is a Chinese power plant where we're skillful and we're very, very capable, energy company, and we are leading the whole financing effort and be a financial advisor and looking at a different project and bring both the top design of the whole financial structure of the project and the actual financing of the project to support. Of course, for this project to be successful, we need to look at the tariffs of the electricity locally. We need to look at the market. We need to look at many of the powers where it goes, so that so that we have a more feasible feasibility of the project. And sometimes the power does not even reside in Angola. It will go to some other countries as well. And sometimes, we need to worry whether we can collect the payment for the electricity as well from the consumers. So the different country has that kind of different parameters or important factors will impact the overall feasibility.
China 30 years ago was really at the very early stage of development, and 30 years developing faster than anybody else. So you seem to have a taste of both worlds.
First and foremost, China has come a long way. Second, the Chinese corporates have also come a long way. We made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot of lessons, and we achieved a lot. So it's many of that lessons that we can share. And then thirdly, I think the international world has come, it's totally different. I think when I mentioned we are working with so many international agencies, and that's many experience they can share with us together. We certainly have the financial strength, and when we started, we don't have that much international experience. We do it together with other banks, other international organizations, so this way is more collaborative. So that's very, very important for us. And talk about risks. I think each country would have geopolitical risk, they have the market risk, they have the macroeconomic risk, so the financial market risk, the legal risk, there's culture, there's religions, there's everything. There's a lot of that. The commercial risk and the loan risk and the credit risk, we are the expert on that. That part we know. But many other risks we don't. So that's why we're working with lawyers, accountants, advisors, and government agencies, and multilateral government agencies and organizations, etc. And the people have been very, very collaborative, and that's the spirit that we're going with our international strategy. And I think that's the spirit of BRI. We want to work together and be collaborative. Oh, by the way, we have done about 200 projects.
Yes.
Close to $70 billion has been lended, and so far has been zero NPLs, non-performing loans. So we've been doing very well.
Congratulations,
And
sir.
we're very, very proud of that.
Some have been suggesting in the media that is a very simple remedy, they say. It just, others provide service support, local knowledge, and China put in the cash. Does it work like that?
Well, China certainly has the cash. Each project is different, so there's no fixed formula. So I think the knowledge, you're only as good as your last project. So when you've done so many projects, and our team, the ICBC team, and many other teams in other banks, and some of the Chinese banks, is very, very experienced. So I think, I don't think that's the fixed formula, but if it's as simple as that, probably it's good. We'll make money, and our life will be much simpler.
Yeah. In the very early stage of China going global process, you see the problem of overpayments. You also see subsequent write-downs. That's just a thing that's well known to the outside world. So during this stage of BRI, how to avoid that?
If you look at world M&A, mergers and acquisitions, I think arguably half the mergers and acquisitions is not successful. So some of the projects getting failed or overpaid or whatever, I think it's natural. And the Chinese companies should be no exception. But I think if you look at the reported stories, the Chinese corporate actually has a much higher success rate if that half of M&A is a benchmark. Second point is China being too long-term oriented. I think that's good news. I think this is the exact...
Well, China may be good news, but for a commercial bank like you, can you do that?
Obviously, we all want quick money and quick wins, but that's not our focus. Our focus is to look for long-term, stable, and sustainable projects. We want work on the project that matters. What does that mean? Well, first and foremost, that means it will be big, relatively speaking. It will be strategic. It will be really good and solid, not only on a commercial basis. We are a commercial bank, of course, it has to be commercial feasible, but has a social impact as well.
Yes.
And we're looking for a project that has more sustainable, need to be ecologically feasible, need to be more fit into the local community.
I also want to ask you from another perspective, Mr. Zhang. You talk about the commercial bank's operation and your strategies behind it. But what about from the overall policy of BRI? You travel extensively around the world. There are different ways people look at it. Some say, well, it's probably a China's domestic policy and yet have a geopolitical consequence of this policy. Others say, well, maybe China just wants to earn some influence around the world, throw out some money, and therefore get the attention and the quote-unquote the respect.
I think it's very difficult, hard, to separate the economic from politics. And it's also, I don't think we should try I don't even try to separate them at all. We are a state-owned bank. I think I mentioned to you before that we're not going to do anything that our shareholders don't like. So we want to do our
and your shareholder
is the Chinese government.
That's right.
So majority of the Chinese government. And we want to do our business in friendly countries. We want to do our business to friendly projects. And we want to put our money at work in a long-term and more sustainable way. The BRI, I think it's when we call it the Belt and Road Initiative, it's an initiative. It represents a philosophy that when we do globalization, we need a collaboration. We need to work together. We need more inclusive growth down the road. Is China going to gain influence along the road? Of course. I think influence comes with the capability. influence comes with the desire. Influence comes with the position that you will be in. Of course, you know.
So there's nothing to be apologetic about.
I
from
think,
China's perspective,
no,
really.
I think if I put my money at work, of course I want to have influence. No, if I'm in the largest shareholder, I want to have a controlling influence. So there's nothing wrong with that.
That's how business works.
That's how business works, and from a business perspective, I would love to see more influence on that, because otherwise my money is not safe, and I want good returns. Of course I want influence. So I think that's all come natural. But if someone wants to put a political cloud or political angle into it, there's nothing wrong with it.
China is having this structural reform. We all understand,
Yeah.
Mr. Zhang, the challenges behind it,
Yeah.
and probably the time it takes to make that change. How much do you think the BRI is likely to help with that, the so-called internal change that is crucial for China to be sustainable in the long term?
The first and foremost priority for the Chinese government is the domestic economy, of course. And for ICBC, over 90% of our revenue and profit come from China. We certainly, our major focus is also in the domestic operations and how. So we're paying attention to the domestic policy changes, domestic market changes, regulatory changes, everything, every day and every second. So this is our bread and butter to a big extent. So I think the overall economic restructuring and reform that happening in China are absolutely in the right direction. And I think the success of that reform and structural reform changes is the key and foundational base for many of the things that China will be doing internationally. And to be honest, China has, as you said, there's so many issues and challenges that we're facing today domestically. And I think everyone is absolutely very, very busy and focused on these issues. And from the ICBC's perspective, we need to focus on how we can better serve the real economy, how we can help and pave the way for small and medium enterprises which will grow into much bigger companies sometime down the road. And we need to look at our own operations, how to manage our own risk and portfolios, etc. So there's so many things that we need to do here as well. But you're absolutely right. I think China's domestic economic restructuring or the structural changes or reform that we're taking on is really, first and foremost, we need to get that right, and that will lay the foundation for our going global strategy, and that will lay the foundation for China to be a more qualified and better qualified world citizen and play a better role and more important role in the global scene.
Mr. Zhang, my final question for you, are we seeing some real dramatic changes to our world today? Are we right now experiencing it every day? And what does that mean for a banker?
I think the world is at a crossroad. As a business person, I think many business people are a little bit lost as well in terms of where we want to go. If I have my own business, where do I look for growth? How do I make sure my money is safe? I think the global financial crisis has changed a lot of things. The world is really has so much uncertainties we never had before. So that's the first point. Secondly, the challenges and the problems that we're facing is also we've never seen before. And thirdly, I think the result, how you deal with these challenges, the end result could be so versatile. So you never seen that before also. So you need to be very, very careful and make sure you get it right.
But the thing is, others are also looking at it. So can you compete? I mean, with Exim Bank here in China, with China Development Bank, and internationally with AIIB, with New Development Bank, World Bank, and many others? Well,
all the names you mentioned, they are our good friends, and they are our partners. So we are really not competing with them. We are working together with them. And there's so many things need to be done. I think the world needs a lot of financing. The world needs so much money. Even we are all operating in 4 cylinders right now. That's not even enough to provide enough financing for so much project, particularly in the infrastructure area, to finance them. So we are more partners than competitors.
That is Zhang Hongli, Senior Executive Vice President of ICBC, talking about the Belt and Road Initiative. His organization is setting up a forum during the upcoming BRI forum, inviting all kinds of players in the financial field, commercial banks, investment banks, developed banks, policy banks, multilateral financial institutions, you name it, to brainstorm about how to take advantage of the potential of BRI in the near future. Talking about the BRI, we will continue our special coverage of the Belt and Road Forum, and we will bring you the live broadcast from the forum when it opens on May the 14th. And with that, we come to the end of today's program. If you'd like to see our program, try to find us World Insight CGTN in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight with Tian Wei team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights from across China and around the world. Good night.